Jim Duke Radio Network.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy.
What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order.
And we are, as a people, opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Welcome to the broadcast. My website is jimdukeperspective.com, and that's where you can check out all the information, connect with me, and listen on your favorite podcast player. We're on them all: iHeartRadio, iTunes, or Apple Podcasts, as they call it, and Google Play, Stitcher, Spreaker. And just check them out. Just wherever you're comfortable listening, that's your venue. That's where you can hear us. Tonight on the episode, my co-host is Julius Rhinehart. Julius has a voice on Facebook in the community, and Julius, welcome. And you're going to help me discuss
Greetings.
We're going to discuss this, take on this Mystery Babylon and conspiracies, I believe, is what you were intended to touch on. And how do they relate?
Well, first of all, I want to say greetings, and I'm glad once again to be on your show. I had, of course, I consider you a friend, and of course, I admire what you're doing. But how do they relate? Well, here's the thing. There's a couple things that I would like us to delve into when it comes to Mystery Babylon. First of all, you can hear me clearly, can't you, Jim?
Oh, yeah, you're clear.
Okay. There's a couple things I'd like to touch on when it comes to Babylon the Great, and that is number one, dealing with the fact that this is a system spoken about in the Bible. This is something that exists. It's something that existed when John was writing. When we look at the passage, if we go through it exegetically the way we would go through any other passage, we could not come away with it thinking that it's just something future. This is something that existed in John's time. Now, and also, now, I'm not going to say personally that I'm going to nail who Mystery Babylon is.
Everybody's looking forward to hearing the answer. They're all asking everybody, who is it? Who's the Antichrist? Who's Mystery Babylon? Are we going to let them down?
Well, I will be fair. I'll be fair enough and say where I'm at with it.
I had you on the show hoping that you had it. Oh, now it's a mystery. That's why it's called mystery. We are gonna have our speculations, though, I'm sure, and we're gonna nail down the suspect.
Right, and that's where I'm at with it right now. And I think we need to be okay with being with saying, hey, this is where I'm at with it, because we're dealing with prophecy. And according to the book of First Corinthians, it says we know in part. I believe it's in First Corinthians chapter 13. We know in part, we prophesy in part. Thank you, Jesus. We know in part, we prophesy in part. So when it comes to dealing with these things, some of these things, either these things have existed and they're going to become clearer as the time moves on, or they're going to be things that we're not going to understand till a certain time. I mean, for instance, the seven thunders. None of us know what the seven thunders are. And anybody that comes on the show or tells you that they know, you can turn the show off because there's a time period where those things are going to be revealed. And that time just hasn't come. Matter of fact, that's a huge argument against preterism. Because one thing we'd have to ask, okay, if these things have came to pass, did anybody figure out what the seven thunders were? You know what I'm saying? And of course, we know that hasn't happened. Now, there are a lot of perspectives when we deal with the end times. So, minus that I just mentioned, I would not dogmatically. I have my position, and I know you have your position, but I wouldn't dogmatically just come against a brother or sister in Christ, maybe because they differ with me on who Mystery Babylon is.
There is
Or
so many divisions in this, and I've I don't get in arguments over it. I speculate and I share my view, and other people can share their view. It's when they get adamant about it in your face,
Right.
and they won't stop until you agree with them, and then they'll cut you off when you don't, or they'll call you names. I've got criticized. I got people calling me blind because I didn't see it their way, and it's all right now. It's speculative because it applies to a couple different timelines depending on what timeline you're in. So, or what age you're in, and at the time. But it's also someone that comes across and says, "I know and you don't." Well, they must be ultimate superiors because they got the knowledge and I didn't. So whatever, But I'm not going to argue or divide. Have an onslaught battle with someone, especially with a brother who has a difference of what it might be, because neither of us could be right in the first place.
Well, I mean, we know that Paul knew the Tanakh. I mean, we know that all of it is, scriptures. But what I'm saying, he knew the Old Testament, and Paul, I believe he had a proverb in his mind when he said this. He said, "He that thinks he knows something, he doesn't know it." I'm paraphrasing. He doesn't know it yet as he ought to know it. Basically, you may think you know, and I've been in this for a minute, and I know you have too, Jim. And I know sometimes you probably go through what I go through when you hear someone just being overtly just dogmatic about certain things. It's like, yeah, I remember when I was there.
Yeah.
And it's like once they come across this information here, this information here, this information here, they're gonna learn they don't know it like they think they do.
Well, what happens when
know?
you come at somebody and you charge them for being a heretic because they don't see it like you, and then you grow or mature in your understanding, and you say, wait a minute, it isn't as I thought. Now you have to retract your statement, and you're joining, along with them. And,
Right.
and I have to say, well, I better eat my words because now I'm the heretic that I accuse somebody else of.
Exactly. And you know what I hear there, Jim? I hear wisdom, and I hear wisdom because I know, like I said, I know you more than likely been there. I've been there. Before we get too far into it, I mean, for instance, there was a time in my life when America sounded probable. There was a time in my life when Rome was very, very probable. And now I'm kind of at another place right now. And it before that it was another place, but now I'm at a place where I'm like, well, I'm going to really just allow myself to just be open to the possibility that these are the suspects. And as time goes on, maybe God will allow me to come across information that will solidify it for me.
I got some stuff here, and we'll probably you'll go back to other views that you had after this. We'll see.
Well, but this is important to the realm of conspiracy. It's important to the realm of conspiracy because the wording that's used in Revelation 17, I think you may have seen this, I think last week when I posted it. I said, when you study Revelation 17 and 18, I said, what you find is when you really study it, it not only talks about a conspiracy, but it talks about a massive conspiracy. But you have to really go through it and study it and really look at the words and examine what's being said. When we go to Revelation 17, just going right into what we're actually dealing with. When you get to Revelation 17, let me go ahead and just open my Bible. I want to talk, but at the same time, it helps to locate verses and stuff too. Revelation 17, when you get to verse 5, and it says, "And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth." Now, of course, me and you had talked about this, Jim, and of course we know that a lot of people that teach prophecy and everything, and a lot of people that talk about Babylon, It's a common mistake. We'll say mystery Babylon, when actually the text doesn't say it like that. And even when you read other translations, they will tell you it'll say a mystery, Babylon the Great. And the way the King James says it shows that they're not in that. They're definitely not wrong or whatever, because it says mystery, comma, Babylon the Great, meaning this is a mystery. Now the wording that's used in Revelation 17 is very interesting. Um, where would we start here? Before I get to the main word that I really want us to really deal with. Well, let me go ahead and do this. Revelation 17, starting at verse 1, it says, "And there came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, and I will show thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters." Now, interestingly enough, when John, as you read through this, John uses words like great whore. Talks about her committing fornication with the kings of the earth. This woman sits on many waters. Waters in scripture, we know, symbolize peoples, tongues, and nations. Okay, so this would show us that the influence of this great whore is global. It's global because it's dealing with humanity. Pretty much, when you're dealing with a water and stuff like that, a lot of times you're dealing with humanity. And then it says in verse 18, if I can skip all the way to verse 18, it says, "And the woman that thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth." One translation says it has dominion over the kings of the earth. Now, when you get to verse 5, I know I'm jumping around, but I'm getting somewhere here. The term that is used is mystery Babylon, and it says Babylon the Great. Now, when the interesting thing in this, when you look at this, this woman, as you read through the text, is riding the beast. She's on the beast, and on her forehead, is mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlot. Now, the term mystery is a very interesting word in the Greek. It's the word mysterion. Mysterion. I may not be pronouncing it right, but I think I have a pretty good pronunciation of what it is. It's mysterion, but the meaning is what we need to focus on, because when you look it up in Greek, it's very interesting what you'll find out. One of the things it means is hidden, or it also means secret. And the way it means it has something. It even implies something that is can only be discovered through. And it's doing this I believe it's doing this because of the history of the word, through initiation, kind of like a secret initiation. Now, of course, as you study through the word, you'll find out that it's talking. It can also definitely mean something that can only be found. The only way you would recognize it is if God revealed it to you.
Right. I have a definition. It's a divine mystery or allegory that is now revealed.
I've heard that. If I could, for a second, hopefully this won't do anything. I'm gonna go out on a limb here. Jesus help me. You can still hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Okay. I'm doing this because I want to hopefully show you the definition that I had came across, because I did I'm gonna cheat a little bit. I did a post on this, and so you can see what I'm talking about, because I'm not I'm definitely not coming against the definition that you're giving, but I'm just trying to add to what we're saying here. Come on now. Hold on, we are almost there. Here we go. All right. It's 3466 in the Strong's Concordance, mysterion. And the definition is a mystery or secret doctrine. A mystery, secret, of which initiation is necessary in the New Testament, the counsels of God, once hidden but now revealed in the gospel or some fact thereof. The Christian revelation generally, particularly truths or details of the Christian revelation. Now, the reason why I went with I'm talking about that definition is because apparently when I looked it up, there apparently was a history that definition had, meaning, and you'll find it in the New Testament. You'll find it in the Old Testament, where they'll use definitions and use things that were used in the culture. And it's not necessarily because the Bible, we live in a day where people will say, well, the Bible's stealing when it does that. No, it's not a thing of stealing, but sometimes it's using something in a way where people will understand it, or it's using something even as a polemic, which means that it's kind of basically throwing shade in a sense at a false idea that's in a culture or something like that. For instance, not trying to get too deep into this, but in John chapter 1, when we see the word in chapter 1, or the logos was something, the concept was used in Greek culture, but what John was pouring, the Hebrew thought process that John was pouring into that term was different, of course, than what the culture was espousing. Even though when the Greek mind would read it, it still said something to the Greek mind, like, whoa, what are you saying? You know what I'm saying? You're saying that the divine, in their mind, that the divine essence that holds everything together became a man?
Right. I think what you're saying is it's taking a human concept or a contemporary concept and using it
Right.
for the allegory to the example of the meaning that they're trying to give in spiritual sense and to convey
Mm-hmm.
to people. So they're using examples of things that are current or modern.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much. And so when you look at Revelation 17, when we see Mystery Babylon, someone, in the most simple terms that I can say, someone once said it like this: it literally could read secret Babylon the Great or hidden Babylon the Great. And so when you read the scriptures in light of what's being said there, and then you see the power that this system has, and the fact that it's reigning over the kings of the earth, but apparently is doing so, if we're looking at the language correctly, apparently is doing so in a way that would not be visible necessarily to the naked eye. Meaning it's doing it, but if you're just looking at society and you're not maybe going deeper than just the average person, you're not likely going to see it. You may, it doesn't mean that you don't perceive something's going on, but you're not likely going to see what is happening in society. And so then when you look at the fact that when you have the Antichrist or the beast system, basically, and it shows her riding the beast. Now there does come a point where it says that I think it's the 10 kings or whatever, and even possibly the beast, hate the woman. There comes a point in time where it's time for the woman to be judged and to be burned with fire. But what we see in the beginning of the text is this woman is riding the beast, and when something is riding something, like if I'm riding a horse, if I'm sitting on a horse, there's the possibility that the implication there possibly is that I'm directing the horse. I'm telling the horse where to go, And so when you look at this, and then when you look at Revelation 18, and it talks about, it being involved in slavery, and slavery even dealing with the souls of men, and it talks about it lays at the feet of this system the death of everyone who died and everything like that. we're obviously dealing with a conspiracy, because this is something, again, and John said it reigns over the kings of the earth. And when you look at the context and look at the way he's saying it, he's not saying this is something future. He's saying this is something that's happening. It's something that's happening now, So now, who is this? Like I said, there was a time in my life where I read it and I thought that it was America. You know what I'm saying? But when you look at the specifics, when you look at maybe even what the woman is arrayed in and different things like that, it's definitely possible when you look at America that we're looking at a daughter of the system, because it says she's the mother of harlots and of abominations of the earth, meaning that you have this abomination over here, you have this harlot over here. And a harlot, when you look at that language throughout the Bible, when you see harlot and fornication and the way it's described in Revelation 17:18, we're talking about someone that is our system that is unfaithful to God. And more than likely, we are dealing, of course, with a religious system. So we're dealing with a religious system, the way the language is being communicated. But it's a religious system that's not faithful to God. It's a religious system, and it doesn't just call it a harlot, or it calls it the mother of harlots. So that would mean if there's a harlot over here, a harlot over here, or an abomination over here, this is an abomination. That's an abomination. This is a harlot. That's a harlot. But that's the mother of harlots. That's the mother of the abominations of the earth. So when you see in America, for instance, certain things, which I believe we're going to get into, that tell us where America is and the presence of this insidious influence in America, I could see why someone would say, "Oh, see, there's the evidence right there." But to me, that's evidence that that this that what we're operating in America is very much so proof that we're a daughter of this system, because America does have on the outside, it does boast of being, or it did at one time anyway, boast of being a Christian nation. But we have signs in America, and you know what I'm talking about. We have signs in America that America's purpose is not to be a Christian nation, not by a certain group of people that set America on a certain course, so to speak. I feel that's something that when we look into it, is that was allowed, and it was allowed because there was too much of a presence in this country, But there was a secret destiny, as one author said, that this country had a secret course that it was put on. And as time has went on, we're seeing the manifestation of what that secret agenda or destiny was. Speaking of Manly Palmer Hall, by the way.
Let me interject just for 1 second and just comment on some things there. Yeah, Secret Destiny of America by Manly P. Hall, that destined America as the headquarters, the Freemasonic headquarters of the world. And to prove that, we have the Great Seal, and I've done extensive studies on this. I have a sort of a collection of information I want to put in a book form eventually, but the formation of the seal, 1782, in order to make a declaration for the goal of America, which had a twofold insignia, one that would appease or satisfy the citizens who were here and were Christians, and the other to satisfy the secret societies who had an underlining intent to overtake the nations through the governments and through political powers. The problem is what political powers were governing them. As you said, it's a daughter of something, not the prominent form of it. And the other comment I just wanted to make, rather than go into that whole secret society thing, which we certainly are equipped to do, but that's not really, that'll take us on a whole rabbit trail, is that
absolutely.
You ever notice, Julius, how in America we have a different mindset than somebody might in Europe or in, say, Korea, or I'm just naming other places, Afghanistan. Christians in Syria. We here in America look at a Western view. So, of course, our perception is always through a Western fish lens. And that fish lens is distorted by our culture and how we see technology of advancements here and how we see the political system here. So to the eyes of those that are examining closely America, that are in it and suspicious of it, they're going to say, there's Babylon, But there are people in Israel saying, no, here's Babylon. And then we got people in Russia saying, no, this might be Babylon. And the confusion is when we limit our own culture or our own influence of what we know around us, and we don't see the whole picture. And I like to bring things to a certain focus and then spread it out through a whole perspective, because it's not just about America. It's about the world, and it's about the people of God in the world, not just in America. And it's about the people that are being deceived around the whole world. So this Babylon, whatever it is, has an influence of the whole world.
That's right. That's right. And its influence can be seen, you know what I'm saying, throughout the world. And one of the reasons I did go the direction I went, is because when I looked it up, the connection was made with the word. This is why it was interesting. The connection was made with the word, with the mystery religions. You know what I'm saying? And so, again, now, obviously, Paul, when he used mystery, and John, when he used mystery, did not necessarily have that in mind. But it's interesting when they talked about, when Paul said the mystery of iniquity is already at work. And then when John said mystery, Babylon the Great, that they used that word. I think that's very interesting. And in the fact, when you look at the Knox translation of Second Thessalonians, when Paul talked about the mystery of iniquity. Anybody that's been on my page knows there was a time when I would put up stuff about secret societies. I would put the mystery of iniquity exposed, and again, when you look at the Knox translation of mystery of iniquity, when they translated it, they translated it, the conspiracy of revolt, is already at work. And one of the reasons why I wanted to and tell me if I'm getting ahead of myself, Jim. I'm not trying to get ahead of myself or getting ahead of where we're trying to go here. But,
I'm sure we'll be doing much of that.
But it's just, the reason why I'm pointing these things out, as opposed to just going to the meat of the matter and saying, "Oh, okay, this is Babylon, everybody," is the fact. I think the main thing that we need to understand is that the presence of this system is here, even though we may not be able to just nail down exactly who it is. It is here, and those of us that are really looking into it and researching it know that this is here. We see the manifestation of this system being here, and we also need to understand that when we study this, it does show the presence of a conspiracy. It shows the presence of a conspiracy. Conspiracy is one of the definitions of a conspiracy is a secret plan or agreement to carry out an illegal or harmful act, especially with political motivation or plot. That's one definition of a conspiracy. Now, of course, when we look at this conspiracy and we look at conspiracies in the Bible, there are spiritual conspiracies. And ultimately, when we look at what's going on in society, if we look at it from a biblical worldview, which is the truth, this is a spiritual conspiracy we see happening. And it's manifesting in political intrigue and stuff like that. But ultimately, the goals and everything are spiritual.
Can I prove that?
Go ahead, please do.
Okay. What I do is I take people through a couple places in order to set up conspiracy. I was invited at a person's meeting. I didn't know I was speaking. I thought I was just invited, and they said, "Oh, you're speaking," and I said, "Okay." And all I had was my Bible, and they thought I was going to have all these footnotes, all these books with me, and they didn't see nothing except for a Bible. And here's what I did: I ran them through a thread to set it up, and it's very easy. You take them to to 2 Corinthians 4:4, and starting at 3, it says, "Even if the gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing, whose mind the God of this age has blinded, who do not believe, lest the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine on them." And that little passage there, it's a conspiracy of the blinding of those who do not believe, hiding those that are veiled from the gospel. And who does it? The God of this age, who has blinded. So I take them then to Isaiah 14, and I'm going backwards. In verse 12, "How you have fallen from heaven, O Lucifer," which is the Latin for Hillel, the light bearer, the one that was given enlightenment and was a brilliance of light, "son of the morning, you cut down to the ground, you weakened the nations. You have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I'll also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farther side of the north. I'll ascend above the heights of the clouds. I'll be like the Most High." There's your conspiracy of what he's going to do with the nations and what he intends to do: put himself on the throne and weaken the nations and be exalted. And then you take Psalm 2, and this tells of the conspiracy of the kings. "Why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointing, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us." If you look at that verse, it says the people plot a vain thing, and the nations rage. The actual interpretation is in Hebrew, and it says the nations conspire and plot a vain thing. And then I take them
something really quick.
Yeah. I just got one more.
Just to now I'm just going to comment. This is just a comment. That's all this is. Just to coincide with what you're saying, you said in the Hebrew it says conspire. Well, to confirm that, we know this is true because in Acts chapter, I believe 2 or 3, Peter quotes that, and he uses the term conspire.
Right.
I just want. Yeah.
And then of course we go back to Genesis 10 and 11, where the Tower of Babel was set up, and Nimrod, we know, is the mighty warrior against God, who set it up to be on the throne, to be exalted as God on the throne, which represents this Hillel character, and he is the personification on earth of Hillel, and setting the whole world up with a one world government then of social conduct, religion, commerce, and such. And of course God messed up their language, so they couldn't. He confused their language, so they couldn't communicate. But this was the origin of Babylon, and this is the thread of the mystery that threads through the rest of the empires that are working through the nations that Lucifer or Hillel is working through to set up his throne. And it all is based on Genesis 3. And this is the last verse, is where the serpent, who is Satan, of course Revelation tells us that, the serpent comes against Eve, or comes against man through Eve, and tempts her to eat of the forbidden fruit in the tree in the midst of the garden. And and she says, "No, I can't eat. I can't even touch it, lest you die." And the serpent, I see the serpent laughing, saying, "You shall not surely die. God knows in that day you'll eat, your eyes will be open. You'll be like God, knowing good and evil." And so he set up, first of all, immortality. You'll not die. You'll not be separated. You'll prosper on this earth forever, and you will have Gnostic knowledge. That's the beginning of the mysteries of Gnostic knowledge. You'll have knowledge that you weren't supposed to have. And I think this sets up for the mysteries, and that thing that people always want, to have that one secret, that mystery that nobody else knows. And this is the setup of secret societies and the Gnostic knowledge and all that. So I think that sets up pretty much what you're saying about conspiracy.
hmm Well, I mean, definitely, and you're actually touching on something because you were talking about a book that you're going to be putting together. Please let me know when that comes to pass because I definitely want to support. But you're touching on something that that is going to be touched on in my book. I'm actually going to be dealing with the concept of gnosis. And we were, the plan is to actually go back to the Book of Genesis because that is a weapon. When we deal with the concept, that is a weapon that the enemy has used down through time. You know, you want to know this. Luring men with not just knowledge, but luring them with a hidden, esoteric type of knowledge.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah.
I give you this, and you'll be a cut above the rest.
Exactly.
Where they don't know this, but you'll know. You'll know the secrets of the universe. You know, and so that is one way. That is the way, pretty much, that the enemy has lured men, lured the people that a lot of us talk about. Really, actuality, to doing the things that they're doing. From what we've looked at and researched and everything. And so, um, one of the reasons why I wanted to really deal with the conspiratorial aspect of it, and you laid that out wonderfully, and you laid it out clearly, and that is the fact that we live in a time, of course, where people don't want to accept the idea of things conspiratorial. They want to look at it as irrational. And what troubles me, unfortunately, Jim, is that there are people in the body of Christ that have bitten on that, and there are people in the body of Christ that want to believe the conspiratorial things don't happen. There was a time when you were dealing with conspiracy, that people differentiated between the term conspiracy and conspiracy theory. Even though conspiracy theory, we know, is a weaponized term. I don't. One thing I want people to understand, because you know me, Jim, I really believe in trying to get things as precise as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need, many of us need to stop saying that the term conspiracy theory was created by the CIA at a certain time, and I'm gonna tell you why. Those are little subtle things that are thrown out there, and if we're not careful, what we'll do is we'll bring it to a situation where we're conversing with somebody, and they'll be able to shut that down, and they'll walk away feeling comfortable or whatever, and feeling like, oh, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. And it's not about strong arming someone or winning an argument. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is this is important information, and you want people to wake up. And so the term conspiracy, I think, last time I looked into it, don't quote me totally on it, but I think it went all the way back to like 1918 or something like that. But it was weaponized. That doesn't take from the fact that it was weaponized. It was weaponized at a certain point in history, and the idea was to make anybody that didn't agree with the official line, I believe in the Kennedy assassination, to make them look kooky and crazy. You know what I'm saying? And so the idea, even in modern culture, when you deal with conspiracy theory, is, oh, they're wacky, or, oh, they don't think, or it's more problematic than that, and really it's more problematic to believe in what's called the accidental view of history. That's more problematic. To think that things just happen in a vacuum, and that doesn't mean that we're saying everything is a conspiracy. But we cannot erase the concept of conspiracy in history. We can't do that, and it's ironic to me. It's ironic to me, and it makes sense when you think about it. That another name that people call the conspiratorial view of history, they call it the devil view of history. But we also live in a culture that wants to deny the existence of Satan. So if you deny the existence of Satan, it's going to logically follow that you're not going to believe in conspiracies. You know what I'm saying? And if you don't believe in conspiracies, for someone to acknowledge conspiracies, now I'm talking about just the general population. it's uneasy for many people in the general population to acknowledge the presence of conspiracies, because then you have to do something with acknowledging something that exists that you may not want to acknowledge, and that is evil. You have to acknowledge evil. You have to say that evil is present in this world. And so if there's evil present in this world, you have to begin to ask questions like, okay, what purpose does this serve? Where does it come from? And these are questions that society is conditioned to stay away from and to not deal with and to kind of run from. And but these are the questions that we really need to be asking. And so that's the reason why I really wanted to deal with this topic, because there are those that have this concept. There was a guy that I was conversating with on someone else's post, and he is a Christian. He's a Christian, but he is vehemently against conspiracy, quote unquote, theory. And he was saying that his words were conspiracy Christianity. I'm not down with that. Conspiracy Christianity is the enemy of truth. These were his words. Now I'm presenting this, and I love that brother. If he happens to even listen to this program, I love that brother, and I believe he knows I love him. But at the same time, I fundamentally disagree with his position. From what I got from it, because I had two different conversations with him, and because conspiracies actually do exist, and he acknowledged that. But the way he was coming at different people, it just appeared to me that he had an issue with the concept of conspiracy overall, in a sense. I'm definitely not trying to falsely accuse him, but that he just came off like he was very skeptical when it came to conspiracy.
You know why I think I tried to analyze this, and I'm not sure. I think sometimes people are actually, their mind is in a disassociation, and they have a fear that you may be right, and they don't want to face that fear. But another thing, yes. I think they believe that if they can believe there's a conspiracy, then their perception of God, and I'm saying their perception of God as being in control of everything, controlling everything, and not letting anything happen to us. Their whole concept of how they learned God doesn't give you any trouble or tribulation, and you live in a rose garden. Once you come to faith, you sort of dispelled his myth. And
well, no, go ahead, Jim. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's just that they don't understand that in the Bible, yes, God laughs at their derision. Yes, God is in control of the whole thing. But God doesn't directly control everybody personally, and allows us to go our rampant ways sometimes, even if it's wicked. And they don't understand there are wicked people against us who does have power over our body. And they don't want to believe that God would allow that. And I think that's why some people may deny a conspiracy, because then they have to surrender that there may be people in this world who have control, as the God of this world is in control of the system. And they don't want to believe that too, because they'll come at me and say, no, God's in control of the system. God puts up kings. God makes the whole political system. It's not a new world order, because God's in control of the United States government and all this stuff. And they don't see what we see behind the veil, and that God allows or yields the God of this world to be given into the system. However, God's got it under control. That's the difference that we see it. God has it all written and under control, and it will abide by his purpose. And those that are saved don't have to fear him who can destroy the body, but fear him who can destroy the body and the soul in hellfire, and that would only be God. So the stuff that happens here is incidental, and based on the free will or the wickedness of those that have wickedness in their heart to carry out. I mean, let's put it this way. Just because you're a Christian doesn't mean your kids cannot be abducted by Satan practitioners, satanic worshipers.
Absolutely.
And that's,
Yeah,
I think, what
absolutely.
happens if we submit to conspiracy. We have to admit that there is some control beyond our control.
Well, I mean, part of us being, imagers, you know what I'm saying, according to the book of Genesis, is now a lot of Calvinists may not like this, but is having a choice and some form of free will. You know what I'm saying? We have to have, we can't, love can't be love, unless we need to be able to voluntarily love. You see what I'm saying? And so there is a free will when it comes to mankind. And then also we have to understand, and any good theologian will tell you that God is, and it's not, I'm not depending on them, I'm just making a point. Any good theologian will tell you, in an honest reading of the Word of God, they'll tell you God is allowing evil to run its course. Now that's just biblical. He's allowing it to run its course. And it's because there's an ultimate purpose, ultimately, that's being served. Part of what's going on, and this is the way I usually explain it, is that, if God could have, these are things people need to pay attention to. God could have just destroyed man the moment sin entered into the picture. Like, you know what? You didn't obey me. That's it. It's over for you. But he didn't do that. He wanted to redeem mankind. He wanted to open up the way for reconciliation. And he wanted he wanted to reclaim the nations, different things like that, or eventually, because there came a point in time where temporarily, he did divorce the nations. So he wanted to reclaim the nations, different things like that. And so in order for that to happen, that involves certain things, and there's an ultimate purpose, divine purpose, that in God's overall plan, where the people may not want to hear this, that Satan serves. There's when you look at the overall divine plan of things, but also people need to understand that there are some things I believe that God's wanting us as mankind to see. When we look at the different kingdoms, especially when you go to the book of Daniel, that have came down through age, these have been kingdoms that have existed and that have been under the rule of man. They've been under the rule of man, and I'm not, now ultimately we do know there's a spiritual side to that as well, but I'm just saying these have been how we've seen down through history how society has fared, separated from God, and then of course in the end we see the Lord returning, and then the kingdoms of this world, according to the book of Revelation, becoming the kingdoms of our Lord and of His Christ. And so when people say the things that they say, some of them about politics, and they generalize, I know what you're talking about. They make general statements. Like God is in control and everything. God is sovereign, but there's certain things that are at play right now. The kingdoms of this world, God is not ruling the kingdoms of this world right now. If He was, He wouldn't say in Revelation, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of His Christ. Satan, according to the Bible, this is what the Bible says, is the God of this world. He's the God of this world system, and so people need to understand that. And also there's another aspect in the conversation that I had with this gentleman, and that is that I figured this out too. I was also dealing with a young man that at one point was buying into the fact that this could be going on. But what turned him off, frankly, was a lot of disinformation that was out there. And disinformation this is why I try, again, to be precise. I try to be on target, and I know you do too. because where you would have someone that is waking up, they'll be put right back to sleep if all they're getting is garbage, and they're getting things that can't be proven and stuff like that, because they'll go out and they want to warn their friends. They want to say, "Hey, look, man, look at what's going on." And these friends who may be studious in a certain area will be like, "Hey, man, that's not accurate. Here, I can prove it to you." And then after a while, when he goes back and nurses his wounds, it's like, well, man, maybe these are just wacky theories that people believe.
I can give you so many
And
examples and scenarios of that, and I fell into that myself, and I'm not going to do it now. But yeah, we're all prone to that at one time or another.
Absolutely.
It's people like you who help me
Absolutely.
stay on course and to remember to get my facts and not overemphasize or over-exaggerate, and to stick with, sources and credible places rather than subjections and speculations and stuff.
Right. Well, praise God, and to God be the glory, But one good book, because there are a lot of people that's been doing this for quite some time, and I'm gonna name a book that just deals with the concept of conspiracy, because we have to. It helps us. It helps our case when we think things out, when we really have a good understanding of what it is we're presenting. But one good book, I do not recommend this person for necessarily for theology, but I have to admit he is a historian and he is a believer. I just think that he has some certain things wrong. Gary North, he wrote a book called Conspiracy, and it's where he examined the conspiratorial view of history, and he examined why that is an accurate view of history. He examined why the accidental view is not a sufficient view. And he goes through dealing with some of the things that people are going to deal with when they're dealing with people that object to conspiracy. Understanding this view and everything. He's a good person. He wrote, again, the name of the book is Conspiracy. Of course, the master to me of introducing people to the conspiratorial view of history, in my humble opinion, is A. Ralph Epperson in his book, The Unseen Hand. That's another good book. If you want your paradigm completely shifted and everything, he's someone that really takes time and says, okay, this is how people understand history over here. This is another view of history over here. Let me explain to you why history does need revising. Official history. And that's what we're dealing with. Is official history does need revising. And some people will say, you can't do that. That's historical revisionism. Historical revisionism is not always wrong. Sometimes things need to be revised because there are errors. People don't want to admit this. There are errors that people will put into history, sometimes accidentally. But then you'll have situations like we have, Jim, where we have a controlling oligarchy that says we don't want you to know this part of history. We don't want this part of history known. So what we're going to do is we're going to see to it that people don't know it. One thing, for instance, that was that they saw to it that people didn't really know about history, that can be documented. It can be documented. Is they wanted people not to have a good understanding of the economic system. And someone said, "Well, you said it can be documented. Where can that be documented?" Norman Dodd talked about it when he was the late Norman Dodd talked about it when he was being interviewed by G. Edward Griffin and being interviewed by the late Dr. Stan Monteith. Also, there was an investigation, because I said Norman Dodd. Norman Dodd, who was Norman Dodd? Norman Dodd was on the Reese Committee to investigate tax-exempt foundations in the 1950s. And so when this investigation was taking place, the foundations that were being investigated were the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the Guggenheim Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and different other to my knowledge, foundations, elite foundations, basically, where the lid was blown on quite a few things, and one of the things that Norman Dodd discovered. I'm going to read a quote here to you, if you don't mind, Jim. I'm going to read a quote here to you, and where this quote came from, partially, I believe, probably totally, was from the interview, but it's in a book that I'm going to read, where it talks about history. Some things were done as far as history is concerned, because there were certain things that they did not want the people to understand. And so I'm about to go into it now and read. It's on page 77. I'm reading from a book. It's called The Ruling Elite. It's the second volume. It's written by a woman named Deanna Spingola. She has, it's, so far, I think it stopped at the third volume. It's a very, it's full of footnotes and everything like that. Both the two books that I do have from the series are fat, especially part two. And the part two she deals with is called The Zionist Seizure of World Power. But on page 77, she states, in collaboration, the Rockefeller Foundation would regulate domestic education, and the Carnegie Foundation would dominate international education. Their first objective was to alter the way the instructors taught history. They approached the Guggenheim Foundation, which, like the Rhodes Scholarships program, granted fellowships. It agreed to fund 20 U.S. students who were seeking doctoral degrees. These students, after indoctrination in London, formed the nucleus of the American Historical Association. This association gave $400,000 grant to create a 7-volume subjective history design to promote a socialistic future. The objective in all U.S. government schools and most private colleges is to alter history and discredit constitutional principles as outdated and impractical. That's on page 77 of her book. Now, to give more context to what I just quoted, in the interview, Dodd was talking about the World War, around the World War I era. They had went into the minutes of the Ford Foundation. Now, again, when you look into this, these are elite families, and anybody, if you research it, I believe the Rockefeller Foundation controls, of course, the Rockefeller Foundation, but it also controls the Ford Foundation, and I believe even the Carnegie Endowment.
Right.
Okay. All right. So they looked into the minutes of the Ford Foundation and saw some things that were, well, let's take it this deep. There was a woman helping Norman Dodd who was looking into the things that he was looking at, apparently. And the report is that she went mad because of some of the things that we're seeing. Now, what was seen in these minutes? Well, the planning of wanting to get the United States involved in a war because they felt like this was the best way to change society. This literally means that these people were looking at war and people even dying possibly and said, you know what? In order to get this done, we don't care as long as it changes society. I'm not saying this is exactly what they said, but in order to say war, someone's going to die. You know what I'm saying? Catastrophes and different things are going to happen. But because you decided that the way to get things to happen in society and to bring about change was war, they decided, we got to involve the United States in a war. This is in the minutes of the Ford Foundation. And then it says, there's a point later on that says, well, how do we make sure that life doesn't return to the way it was prior to 1914? Now, interestingly enough, the Federal Reserve was passed in 1913. So for many reasons, you could look at that date and say that's significant. That's significant. I would recommend everybody listen to this interview that I'm talking about.
Yeah, I have it on my website for anybody interested. I have a podcast episode from last year, Socialism for New World Order, Indoctrination of Students. And in that, I do play bits of that interview if anybody wants to hear it. You can search off my website.
Awesome. And, it said, they decided, well, in order for this to happen, we need to control the education system. And so what they decided was, I believe it was the Rockefeller Foundation had to control a certain part of it, and the Carnegie. It was divided up between national and international.
Right.
And then he went on to say, that's when he went on to talk about the nucleus of the American Historical Association. Now, to make this even more interesting, and I hope I'm not overdoing this, Jim, but I wanted to use another thing that I wanted to read from, and I believe you're going to appreciate it because I'm I'm about to read a man that everybody needs to know about. I know you know about him. I'm going to read from Professor Sutton, Anthony Sutton. Anthony Sutton was the person who first exposed, on a big level, the Order of Skull and Bones. The way he was able to do this, he was provided with a membership list. He was provided with a membership list from a woman that all of us should know, Charlotte Thompson Iserby. Charlotte Thompson Iserby had a father and a grandfather who were involved in the Order of Skull and Bones. Now, it would sound like that I'm jumping to something, but I'm not, because we're at the beginning of the book. He deals with history. I'm reading from America's Secret Establishment. Professor Sutton was by no means a nut. He was at one point a fellow at the Hoover Institution. There's material out there now that you can get that he wrote that's weightier than the stuff he wrote for the populace, because he was a professor. And it doesn't mean that when you read some of his less weightier stuff, if you're not going to be impressed or whatever you would want to say. But there was one that he wrote about Western technology that's very, from my understanding, very weighty. But anyway, let me start this. It's on page 1 of America's Secret Establishment. He says, during the past 100 years, any theory of history or historical evidence that falls outside the pattern established by the American Historical Association and the major foundations with their grant-making power has been attacked or rejected, not on the basis of any evidence presented, but on the basis of the acceptability of the argument to the so-called Eastern establishment and its official historical line. Now, he said Eastern liberal establishment. That is a name used by people that are aware of what's going on, of the elite. That's one of the names that they're called, is the Eastern liberal establishment, the faction that's here in America. Now, when you hear the term liberal, you have to kind of separate it from the modern term, in a sense, because we know the modern left and right paradigm is nothing but a horse and pony show. But when we're dealing with this, we're dealing with a group of people that claim or masquerade themselves in one manner when really they are coming and doing things in another manner. But anyway, it says there is an official history. There is an establishment history, an official history, which dominates history textbooks, trade publishing, the media, and library shelves. The official line always assumes that events such as wars, revolutions, scandals, assassinations, and more or less random, unconnected events. By definition, events can never be the result of a conspiracy. They can never result from premeditated, planned group action. An excellent example is the Kennedy assassination, when within 9 hours of the Dallas tragedy, TV networks announced the shooting was not a conspiracy. Very quickly. Think about that now. This is me talking right now. Very quickly announcing it wasn't a conspiracy. Regardless of the fact that a negative proposition can never be proven and that the investigation had already begun. And that the investigation had barely begun. Had barely begun. Woe betide any book or author that falls outside the official guidelines. Foundation support is not there. Publishers get cold feet. Distribution is hit and miss and non-existent. Okay, there's a key thing that I'm wanting to be known here in just a bit. Just to ensure the official line dominates, in 1946, the Rockefeller Foundation allotted $139,000 for an official history of World War II. This to avoid a repeat of debunking history books, which embarrassed the establishment after World War I. So he's giving us a little bit more information. The reader will be interested to know that the order, meaning talking about Skull and Bones, that the order we are about to investigate had great foresight back in the 1800s to create both the American Historical Association and the American Economic Association. Most economists were then more historians and analysis. Now, it's very important that I say this. Not only was Professor Sutton someone who wrote on history, he was actually an economist. So he's speaking from a certain place here. He was an economist as well. But anyway, under their terms within Economic Association, most economists were then more historians than analysts, rather. Under their terms, with their people and their objectives. Andrew Dixon White was a member of the order and the first president of the American Historical Association. So not only do we see, prominent elite families involved, but we see a connection, a direct connection, even with a secret order being involved, And so, we have, we have here, it helps us to understand that, okay, even though we do have an official history here and certain things are being communicated and certain things are being taught, that there is this insidious influence that says, okay, history is going to be taught, but it's going to be taught from the perspective we want it to be taught from. And this is why, in order to understand specifically, economic history, to understand, to be financially literate, a person in America today really has to educate themselves. You're not going to get it the way you need to in the school system. Most Americans today, when we even deal with the economy, are going to think that the economy, they're going to have a view of the economy that isn't real, that isn't what's actually happening. They're going to think in terms of, how many people think in terms of the president? I mean, I know you know this, Jim, and a lot of your viewers or listeners know this. How many people that we know think in terms, when they think of the economy, they think in terms of the president? And our economy is not controlled by the president. Ultimately it's not, and so.
Like he can wave his magic wand and straighten everything up. Right.
We have what in a sense, a public-private, partnership. You have a quasi-secret corporation, basically, or a quasi. It's controlled. Like again, we have the Federal Reserve, is what I'm trying to say. But the Federal Reserve is able to do what it's doing because the government is in agreement with it. The government is saying, "Oh, do it." Even though it's placing us in debt, and at some point we're going to have to pay the piper. Here you go. And this is why I tell people when you're understanding what's going on in society, it's deeper than just understanding something's going on. Understand one thing that'll help you is understanding terminology, understanding what is and what isn't. I can't emphasize that enough. Understand that when the mainstream media comes on television, which was co-opted a long time ago, but when the mainstream media comes on television and starts blaming the free market for everything, it's important that you understand that we don't have a free market. We haven't had a free market since at least 1913. Because you can't have a free market where there's central planning. And with the Federal Reserve, you have a central bank, and some would argue that the genesis of socialism in America was 1933. Yeah, that can be argued, but really, I would say it started in 1913. Some would go as far to say, no, it started in the Civil War. But I would say 1913. I'm not saying that nothing insidious happened during the Civil War, because it did, but the genesis, I would say, where things really kind of got going. Now, this system, this influence got its power. This elite cabal really got a whole lot of power from things that transpired, especially I would say after the Civil War, because you had the rise of the titans of industry, or the robber barons is really what you should call them, of the robber barons. And it was these same people, these same families that set up these foundations that I'm talking about. Their bloodlines set up these foundations and whatnot that I'm talking about. That have been put into place, number one, so that these elite bloodlines that have been around for a long time, that these elite bloodlines could escape. For one, escape being taxed and hide their wealth, but number two, to fundamentally change society.
I agree with you about the 1913 was definitely a chapter of an agreement made for it, and the Civil War led to that. But I go beyond that. I would like to go right to the founding of America, of the Declaration of Independence, where it was signed and it was decreed in the document of the Declaration of Independence to allow the leniency for a future takeover of these wealthy bankers. And to prove that, what I go to is the duel between Aaron Burr and Hamilton. And a lot of people don't know, and this was I guess in the early 1800s, I believe, or probably around just before the Civil. I think it was during President Thomas Jefferson's term, and Thomas Jefferson was an apologist for the Illuminati. A lot of people don't know that.
Oh yeah,
and Weishaupt. But Aaron Burr was an agent of the Rothschilds, and the duel wasn't over a disagreement. It was over the argument over where the centralized bank would be in America. And Hamilton wanted control over it, and Burr wanted control over it. So the duel supposedly was over the economic battle of bankers. So it was kind of fomenting then. It was starting then to really gain ground. And the Civil War was a plot in order to cause an enemy in America, because there was no external enemy, so they divided the nation itself to cause friction. That way the Rothschild banks could fund both sides of the war and gain interest then. But then, as you talk about, the Federal Reserve was a stake in the ground. It was a stake in the heart, so to speak, of America, where it was totally submitted to the wealthy bankers. So
Absolutely. It's like it was almost like a nail in the coffin, really, because between, and it sounds like I'm backtracking, but I'm not, in that sense. But I'm just saying I am leaving room for the fact that, because if you heard what I said earlier, I am leaving room for the fact that I believe I can agree with that. I can agree with what you're saying. Um, Ralph Epperson, matter of fact, makes an excellent case for the fact of certain things being written into our founding documents.
Hmm.
Him and Bill Cooper, as a matter of fact, and I definitely believe and agree with that. The fact that pretty much they gave us a certain kind of system, but they said it was almost like they kind of said, okay, we're going to put this in here, and if you fail, this is what's going to happen. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, you hear them calling America the Great Experiment, and when you understand what's in the documents, you understand why it was called the Great Experiment more than
And
likely, and
what
that
that
is
experiment is, right?
right. And so, one good book that kind of goes into, I want to say, the first 100 years, in a sense. Let me get this right. From the 1800s to 1899, excuse me. There's a book called The Coming Battle, where it kind of goes through the history, because the Federal Reserve, that's why I said I felt like it may have been the nail in the coffin, because they had wanted central banks in the country, and there had been other central banks in the country before the Federal Reserve. But it's like that they had amassed enough power after the Civil War and amassed enough might or whatever to finally get it to where, okay, this is going to go in, and then it's not going to be overturned. And later on, it's like I was sharing what I shared earlier. It's almost as if it was like, okay, to ensure that it's not ever turned back, we're going to make sure that America is not thinking, because even Anthony Sutton was talking about it, that America is not thinking like it thought before this time period, And it just kind of shows you, when you think about it, Jim, where America even is today. How sometimes when you look at certain things and you hear people articulate certain things, and you try to tell them, hey, really the reason you think like that is because of this. Oh no, I got my own free mind, and da, 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 da. And I'm like, but this is why you're agreeing with this. And you can say that because there was a time in America when people didn't think like that. And we're dealing with an evolutionary, and I'm not talking about the scientific thing, but we're dealing with an evolutionary type of conspiracy, meaning they're not conspiring for revolution or via revolution, although that is possibly somewhere in their plans if this other part doesn't work. But they're conspiring evolutionary, meaning or through evolution, meaning that they're gradually doing things. They're gradually implementing things. They're gradually changing legislation. And at the same time, while they're doing a lot of these things, the propaganda machine is going and telling people, trying to give them things that sound ever so right. Why? How could you not want this? I remember when they was talking about the healthcare situation. Why would you fight this and everything like that? And they don't know that these things that they're trying to implement, they're not implementing them to try to help the people. They're implementing them to control the people.
Right. It's all about propaganda for an agenda. And what they have to
Right.
first do is subdue the mind. And the only way to do that is control the streams of information and the entertainment value and change the society to accept it. And then once they introduce it, they see, years ago, if you said there's going to be a national healthcare plan, people would say, no way. And even during Obama's administration, people were still trying to accuse it of being a national healthcare plan. And remember, Obama denied that and said, no, that's not what it is. It's not a one-payer system. No. Even though it was inching towards that, you had to first condition the minds to think that we needed it. And that's part of the entertainment and part of the media's job through these entities, this elite group to subdue the minds first, to subject it and condition it to accept the conditions of the agenda that they're setting forth. So yeah, a lot of this education and entertainment and social media and all that's to be used to twist the mind, to accept it, to condition it, to submit to it, and then once it's presented, it's like, oh yeah, sure. We don't mind being surveilled. We don't mind cameras being up to protect us all around our neighborhoods. We don't mind the spying on us and taking our private information. No, because it's to get terrorists, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the subjection.
And that's what people don't get, Jim. It's like these things are presented in a way, and that's the propaganda. It's presented in a way, oh, this is for you. This is to benefit you. And that's what people are even Christians, and this is what bothers me, struggle to look beyond that. It's like, no, quit listening to what they're telling you and look into what's being done. And if you look into what's being done, you'll see that this is detrimental to you. It's not here to help you. And people want to ask, and again, I'm a guy that likes sources, but one of the reasons we know this is because Carol Quigley, in his book Tragedy and Hope, Carol Quigley was a professor at Georgetown, Bill Clinton's mentor. But Carol Quigley, people say, well, conspiracies couldn't happen because everybody can't keep a secret. Well, Carol Quigley didn't keep the secret.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of these people don't. It's just that the avenues they speak on it are closed avenues. And when they tell the public, they're telling the public in tongue in cheek, and the public don't really want to hear it. So they're telling us. It's just that most people don't want to hear it, so they don't recognize it.
Carol Quigley even said later on, Jim, I know you probably know about this, he even said later on that Tragedy and Hope, his book was doing good, Jim.
Right.
It was doing good, but they suppressed his book more. He said he's sure that his book was suppressed.
Yeah.
And that's because powerful people, it was really supposed to be something, apparently, I think they wanted him to do it. I think they wanted him to chronicle these things for them. But what happened is Tragedy and Hope fell into the hands of the wrong, quote unquote, people.
Yeah, and he thought, he was wondering, he wrote it, and it was propagandist. It was and he wrote it in a plea for all this agenda, and that's why he was surprised when he was surprised when it seemed like it wasn't being accepted. He's like, if the plan's so good and acceptable, why isn't it out there in the public? He wanted it out there in the public.
Well, I mean, he said that. He said, there's a secret group controlling things and doing stuff, and
I of all people should know. He said that.
I don't know why. Yeah. I don't know why these guys ain't telling everybody what they're doing. You know? So
it's all good. It's good what they're doing. Why aren't they out there telling them? That's what he was. Yeah, that was his mindset.
And I know you have studious people on your program, so I know they're here. But if people are hearing it for the first time, they're like, "What? You mean to tell me that there's a guy that wrote a book that admitted this stuff?" Yes, there is a guy, and he's
professor.
Not the only one. A professor. He admitted, yeah, this is going on. And what many people miss about that book is, some of them will zero in on the Rhodes Scholarship and the Milner Group and everything, and I kind of get that. But if you pay close attention, he speaks on the fact, apparently, that even beyond the Milner Group, that this financial group has existed, and I'm saying financial lightly, because I definitely believe it's deeper than that, has existed beyond that group. One of the people that I believe helped fund the Milner Group was Lord Rothschild.
Oh, absolutely.
And of course, the Rothschilds' power goes hundreds of years before the foundation of the Milner Group. Mm-hmm. Some hundreds of years before that. And so these families have been around a long time. No one that studies these things closely can deny that there has been a oligarchical class, or we say this, an oligarchical presence through history, throughout certain parts of history. And
They
I would
know it.
maintain.
They know it, but they don't really. It doesn't seem significant.
Right. Right. Now, I want to emphasize that what I'm talking about right now is just people, and I mean this in the nicest way possible. I'm talking about just people, um, well, people that have a tendency to look deep into history, you know, and in the academic fields, people don't know this. Um, they will tell you that they reject conspiratorial side of things, but there literally are elite studies, like really, some of which are worth reading. You know what I'm saying? Um, there was, what's his name? There was a guy named William. I think his name was William Dunhoff that wrote books on the ruling. Uh, he would call it the ruling class. You know, and he would mention names that many of us in the truth community wouldn't know about. I mean, he was the first one who wrote a book, I believe, about the Bohemian Grove. You know, and so these kind of things do
Is that Gunderson
exist.
that you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about his name is William Dunhoff. This was like a academic guy, and I'm just saying that
Okay.
these kind of studies, uh, they do exist. They may not communicate them the way we would, because there are people in among the truth community that says no, it goes beyond just networks of power. It goes beyond just things that just tend to happen in society, and that's where I would disagree with some of these people that like him and possibly like someone like a Noam Chomsky or someone like that. And that is no, it goes deeper than that. This is a conspiracy, you know. And so you have people like G. Edward Griffin, Dennis Cuddy, and I'm mentioning these people because these are especially Dennis Cuddy. Dennis Cuddy is an academic; he's a PhD, you know, and he'll tell you, no, this is a conspiracy, and and let me explain to you why I believe it's a conspiracy, you know. And by the way, anybody that doesn't have any of his books, I would recommend Dr. Dennis Cuddy's books because he tries to document, you know, what he's saying. And right now, I think his stuff is like for a cheap price. You know, right now, I believe. But you know, so going back to Carol Quigley. Carol Quigley is one person that was connected to this system, that knew the people. He said he was allowed to see their secret records and everything like that. Then you have people like the guy that wrote Fire in the Minds of Men, James Billington.
Right.
James Billington was CFR, and he wrote about secret societies. Former Library of Congress, you know, or I believe, Library of Congress, you know. Then you have someone like who waited years before he put his name on his work, Philip Drew Administrator, written by Colonel Edward Mandell House. Colonel Edward Mandell House was the handler, just to be politically incorrect about it, he was the handler of Woodrow Wilson.
Right.
And he was called Secret Guardian Angel of the Federal Reserve Act.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so in this book that's fictional, it's fictional, but he writes, people that have read it or have looked into it at least will tell you that the one thing that's noticeable in there, even though it's a fictional account, he projected the future in it. He projected a revolution in Russia, apparently. Even possibly, the Depression. You know, and so my point is, you have people that have been close to these things that have admitted these things. And so, with Carol Quigley, getting back to what I was saying, with Carol Quigley, he said in there that one of the things that they were going to utilize to control people in the future was going to be their health medical benefits, like their health, basically their health care, just going off the top of my head. But I'd have to find the quote. But if people look, they can find it. It's it's not like I'm making it up. It literally is something basically that he said. And this is someone, again, that knows these people and that is writing a book, and it's just being very frank I know you know this, very frank in the book, saying, hey, these people exist. These are their plans. This is what they want to do. And this is what's going to happen, pretty much. And so it's not that people aren't speaking out. It's just that, again, it's like what Professor Sutton said. It's what dominates, especially when you're in schools and everything. What dominates is because of people controlling certain power centers is the accidental view of history. And so to the masses, I hate to use that term, the masses, but to the populace, what is pushed and what's pushed is reasonable and logical is the accidental view of history. I had another experience, Jim, where another Christian, it was a Christian, said, people that, believe in conspiracy theories, basically, must have never ran a business because you cannot keep secrets or something like that. Or it takes, first of all, he said that this is, we already, I believe, Jim, destroyed the fact about people not keeping secrets. But another thing he said that you need thousands of people to do a conspiracy. Now, me and you both know that that's not true.
Right.
That is not true. You don't need a whole lot of people to do a conspiracy. Especially when I think we talked before we got on here. We did talk before we got on here. We talked about espionage. Okay. If anybody studies espionage, that will dispel immediately. Once you really get to understand it will dispel almost immediately the concept that you need a whole bunch of people cooperating with you. That is not what you need. You need a core group of people, and these people need to have power. You need to aim for people with power. If you study Adam Weishaupt, that was something, if my memory serves me correctly, that was something that he wanted. He wanted people of power. Why is that? Because if you get people of power, all you have to do is control the people of power. And if you control the people of power, they will do the dictates that you're saying. And it can affect the whole business. It can affect the whole religious organization. Let's say if the head of a religious organization, the Southern Baptist Convention, not trying to pick on them, but let's say that you control the head of the Southern Baptist Convention. All you have to do is control the head, and it compromises that entire body, really.
You and I know about, about William Guy Carr and his book Pawns in the Game, and he's got a couple other books. He described the avenue that all you would do is the higher oligarchy would approach the higher, what we would call the deep state today, the shadow government. It's
right.
The deep state. It's just the higher level politicians, and use them to bribe the other politicians by bribery, by blackmail. You can control them very easily to fall in line, and then entice them.
That's where Epstein comes in, I think. But go ahead.
Yeah, and it's very easy, as I explained many times. It's very easy to subdue somebody by basically waving a carrot before their eyes, and then enticing them, and then dangling it over them as blackmail or bribe. But the elite do one more thing. They don't just say, do this or we'll kill your family. They say, do this or we'll kill your family, but we'll give you this. And that little enticement is enough for them to be demoralized and to get rid of guilt or anything else. And it's very easy to control people. We know that they do this all the time. I mean, it's how it's run, and it's the elite.
Absolutely.
The elite at the top control the money to be able to control the politicians, and the politicians below it have to fall in line. That's why you never see a majority. Even when there's a majority party, you never see, when they don't want an agenda, you never see a majority party, even when they have both House and Senate, vote on something that the oligarchy don't want voted for, because they can easily bend those that a few of them in order to hijack the votes away from it. So it's easily to control it. It's not that hard to figure out.
I mean, when we look at Rockefeller, and I'm talking about just the family bloodlines now, we look at Rockefeller and Vanderbilt and different ones like that. These people, what did they do? People don't really think this through. These people, people on the other side don't seem to think this through. And these people created schools. They created schools, and now, with you creating schools, all you have to do is enforce certain policies. You don't have to control every teacher. You don't have to do that. All you have to do is have certain policies and have the school's policies directed in a certain direction, and you can train up a generation that is at least thinking in terms of internationalism, in terms of there being a government by the few, and that being the way to go. That discourages certain societal norms and stuff like that. You don't really need to control every single person. Now, I hope people are not misunderstanding what I'm saying. For those listening, I'm not disagreeing with Jim, because that is an integral part of what they're doing, what Jim's talking about. But I'm just adding on to that, and I'm sure he understands where we are agreeing, and that is that there's just a way when you're thinking in these terms to kind of get the ball rolling. And so apparently these people understood that. It's like, well, we're going to create institutions of learning. Not only that, we're going to have these think tanks, which are a couple of rungs out from the actual conspiracy, even the Bilderberg group and different groups like that. These groups, it's very wicked and wickedly wise, as someone would say, how they did it, because you could point to some of these groups and technically they could argue that it's not a conspiracy. And that's because even though it is organized corruption, and it's definitely not funny, but I'm just making a point, it's even though it is corruption, those of us that really study deeply into this know that these are front groups. That's what these are. The Council on Foreign Relations and all that, these are front groups. In the deep background, what you find when you research this is what's controlling is secret societies, and ultimately what's really deeply in control is elite families, elite bloodline families that I definitely agree and definitely believe are operating in generational Luciferianism or Satanism. Technically we could argue the difference, but when you really look deeper into it, I don't really think that ultimately there's a difference that needs to be argued. Not ultimately. But in any event, they created these things and then when you do have groups like the Bilderberg group, okay, where, let's face it, policy is being established and things are being done. Like the European Union was hatched from the Bilderberg group, basically. And so basically you have people, who do you have at the Bilderberg group? If you research it, for those that are listening, you have media heads, you have politicians, you have aspiring presidents. There's been a history of aspiring presidents. Before Bill Clinton got elected, where did he go? The Bilderberg group. The Bilderberg group. And so, but these people can literally go back that are in influential positions, and they can affect policy for their entire corporation that is going in the direction of the ultimate agenda. And the people in the corporation may not even realize that that's what they're doing. They're just doing what their boss is telling them to do. And so it really is true to this whole thing that what is being done and how this hierarchy is ran is through compartmentalization. Compartmentalization, meaning that in espionage, this is something that's even done. It's need to know type stuff, meaning at this level, at the top level, the best way I can say this is to imagine that pyramid on the back of your dollar bill. At the top level is people that know every single thing that's happening. They know what the entire agenda is. But below them is powerful people but they only know what they need to know on that level. They don't know everything, even though they know more than most of the population, probably. But then you have people below them, they know less than the people above them. And by the time it gets down to a certain point, you get to certain people that don't know that what's being done is a conspiracy. They just look at it like, well, we're just advancing society along. We're just, doing certain things. There are meetings on the global level that take place where world order and world government is talked about. But these people would never tell you that they're engaged in a conspiracy, because a lot of them may not be all the way up that rung and know that it's a conspiracy. They may just think, well, we're just doing this, and I think world government's the way to go. I mean, world peace through world law, and that may be really what they're thinking. But then there are people up at the top that know what the real agenda is.
I think
they
they're
know
the ones
what's really going on.
Yeah, they're the ones following that Luciferian doctrine, that Luciferian idea, and that thing that I threaded back through to Genesis, from Revelation back to Genesis, and this is the conspiracy of blinding our eyes to the gospel, controlling the nations, and putting Lucifer on the throne. And this gets back. We got to sum up. We were first talking about Mystery Babylon, so this is all sort of the foundation of Mystery Babylon, I believe, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
What is Mystery Babylon?
I think we discussed what was, we went to Mystery Babylon, and I think we discussed that if people were following along, we were discussing the inner workings of the system. And when we talk about Mystery Babylon, the best way I would describe it as the system that the enemy has used and is using. At this point, I would describe it that he has used and is using to corrupt the nations, to bring them under his eventual, if they're already under his control, but to bring them to a certain point, to bring them to this new world order that we're going to see, and ultimately, like you said, to enthrone, to sit Lucifer basically on the throne. We see in Revelation 13 that they're going to worship beasts, but it only says they're going to worship the beast. It says they're going to worship him and the dragon that gave him his power. Who's the dragon? Satan. It tells you in chapter 12 that the dragon is that old serpent called the devil and Satan. And so, as you so wonderfully put it, breaking down Isaiah 14, this is what the enemy is wanting. He's wanting to have a people that are going to ultimately fall into his, for lack of a better term, graces, and they're going to worship him, as God. And ultimately, I think somewhere in his sick mind, I believe what he has in store is, because ultimately he knows he's going to lose. I think ultimately it's kind of a way to kind of, in his own way, kind of put it in the face, of God. Like, yeah, I got all these people. They're going to go right to hell with me. They're going to go. All these people. They were made in your image, and I've deceived them. They're all going to go where I'm going. So you're going to send me there, but they're coming with me. And and that's why people need to know. This is why people need to know, of course, the gospel, of course, but they need to know the truth. They need to know the truth, and we know the gospel is the truth. But what I'm saying, that they need to know what the Bible tells us about society, and I think that that does come through, of course, through the gospel if it's explained thoroughly. It also just comes through a general understanding of what the Bible teaches us about man, about the world system, and this is why, though certain people in the body of Christ, unfortunately, will look at people like yourself and even myself, to God be the glory, and say, well, I don't see where that's necessary. It's very necessary, and it's going to become even more necessary as time progresses because of the times that we're in. We're in the end times. People need to know what's going on behind the scenes that's not that hidden. That's the thing about it. It's not that hidden. It's just that you have to look beneath the surface. And I mean, and we're at a point in history, Jim, I think you would agree with me, it's just beneath the surface. It's not even very low below the surface. It's like just beneath the surface. All you have to do is pay a little bit more attention.
What they call it
And
is hidden in plain sight.
Exactly.
It's there,
You got it.
but it's obscured,
Right.
and people are conditioned against it or away from it not to see it. But part of their joy, part of their practice, part of their ritual is to put it in our face without us knowing it. That's a power to them. And
Right.
it actually is a power to Satan, to the Luciferian plan, because Satan doesn't want himself obscured as much as he wants himself accepted. And by obscuring the meaning of society through the political realm, through the religious realm, working through Rome, working through Israel, working through the apostate church, and threading us with that mindset of Babylon, the original intent of the Tower of Babylon with Nimrod, and to raise a tower into the heavens to spiritually declare oneself God and to represent Satan, Lucifer on the throne, is the ultimate system. And if anybody can't agree on where or who Babylon specifically is, I think one thing is what I bring people to is through this rage of discussion and attacks on each other, we can agree that Babylon isn't a modern state. It's a convergence of all that politically, socially, economically, and religiously, right from the Garden of Eden, stringing through Babylon as the essence of empires, world empires, physical world empires, through the teachings of Pharisees and the Jewish and the apostate faith away from God, right up into the Catholicism of Rome, Vatican, and Jesuits, using Freemasonry, using the Illuminati banner, and using the secret societies to wage a battle against God's anointed and against society to bring about this new world order, one world government, which is just basically one world of Lucifer on the throne, and people either doing his bidding and serving him, worshiping him, or being demised with him. And that's pretty much the essence of Mystery Babylon, even if we can't agree on where or what it exactly is, right?
I believe that you beautifully, broke that down. I believe you beautifully broke that down. I'll say this, there are definitely certain patterns we need to look at. But, I'll say this. I mean, you talked about how they want to put it in our face. I mean, if people look at the European Union, that famous picture of the European Union, and they have the European Parliament, I believe it is, Jim.
Yeah.
The European Parliament.
Yep.
And then they have the old picture of what Babel more than likely looks like. And, what is it? One people, many tongues or something like that?
One voice, one, I think it says many languages, one voice, something, or many tongues, one voice,
right.
Something like that.
Right. And then it has all these pentagrams around it. These people know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. At the top, they know what they're doing.
And they're following the pattern of the Bible. Not just the Bible predicts it. They're actually using that as their outline. And they are using the, Bible talks about the little horn of great things and the 10 horns, 10 kingdoms divided. Rome represents the order of the government that was and is not and yet is when John was writing Revelation. So it could be Rome, but it's also apostate of Pharisees, and it's also the city that's being organized right now through Israel and the takeover of Jerusalem for the spiritual battle. And it's a thread of all this working through. I don't think it's one city necessarily as much as it is a city on on 7 hills. Yeah, it could be Rome, but it's a metaphor for what it is. Babylon, Mystery Babylon, spiritual Babylon.
I don't want to extend it too much further, but I'll say this, and I'm saying that just definitely out of respect to you. I know you want to wind it up here soon. But I remember listening to a guy named Ken Klein talk about Mystery Babylon. He talked
I have his
about
book.
yeah, he talked about Rome. He made a good point because he showed pictures, and sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. And people talk about the city of seven hills, but when he showed those hills, I'm like, they're not what people think. You know what I'm saying? Um, it more than likely may not be Rome because of the of how it's being described. Now, again, I'm not. You heard me, Jim, earlier on. I'm not being dogmatic, but I tend to doubt that it's Rome. I do believe that it is a city, but to be honest, you have to be open. I believe to interpretation, and maybe how is city being used? I mean, since he was in the spirit, he was in the spirit when he saw this. So how is that being used? Or it could be being used very naturally. You know what I'm saying? But I do believe it's a city. But at this point, like I said, I don't know what. And the fact that it's a city is what's made me to know that it couldn't be America, because America's not a city. It's a nation. You know. But who that is, I mean, there are people that have done studies and said, and this is the last place I landed, Jim, before I just said, you know what, I'm just going to allow God to direct me, and when I see it in clear sight, I'll say this is where I'm at. But a convincing argument I heard was that it was Israel, or that it was, because of how it's described, and when you put it next to other passages in the Bible, it actually makes sense.
Although Israel's not a city either.
Right. See, well, specifically, let me be clear. Specifically, Jerusalem.
Right.
That's specifically what I'm talking about.
And I've heard that argument too, and we have a lot of listeners that believe that, because when it talks about the harlot, a lot of times it talks about apostate Israel and the people of Israel. Right. But it also talks in Revelation about the harlot, and Paul talks about the harlot as Gentile churches also. So a harlot can represent a church, really anything apostate. It doesn't have to be necessarily the Jews, but I've heard compelling arguments for both the city in Jerusalem and the city in Vatican. But the one thing that we do know is that it is going to thread through all these bloodlines of those that are against God, going right back to paganism, and right through the line of Nimrod, and right through the line of Rome, and right through the line of Israel, the Jerusalem, and those that are of the synagogue of Satan. So it's involving apostate church, and it's involving a political entity. I think I lost you there. Oh, you there?
Yeah, for a second we did. I'm back.
Yeah,
I'm back.
Okay. We got to close it up in a second anyway. So
you're definitely going the right. Yeah, you hear me?
Yeah. Yep.
Jim?
Yeah, I got you. Can you hear me?
You're definitely going. Yeah. You're definitely going the direction. That again, that's how you can tell where we are. You're going in the direction that I like, because guess what? You're challenging. Even though I said that's not even my position anymore, but again, you're saying some things that hopefully listeners in the audience will say, you know what? I know I have this position, but Jim just said something that made me think.
Well, let me say something else to make people think. Let me make people also think. If you want to get a good view, how about during the time of the writing, how about the disciples of those that were writing? The disciples of John, the disciples of
Exactly.
And they pointed to Rome.
They did
at the time. So
I can't deny that, Jim. They did. They pointed to Rome, which I'm gonna be honest. That's kind of making more sense, especially when I know me and you have, and I haven't got there like I want to, but I know you have taken time to really dig into this. There literally are bloodlines that kind of go back there. You know what I'm saying? And what I mean by that is not enough people talk about Venice. You know what I'm saying? Or different places where. Okay, this is doing something again.
Yeah, it's starting to cut out a little bit.
What were you saying though?
No, it's just well, the early church were pointing at Rome that they were suspecting was that harlot because of the hijack of the Christian faith. But we do know this. We do know that it stands for a church, and it stands for the city as a state. So it's a combination of church and state, the political church and state combining. And this is apostate. This is where we are in the apostate world, where religion, whether it's coming from Israel or Jerusalem, whether it's coming from Rome, and now they're converging into the political state. This whole thing is actually coming down, from what I see, as one system. The beast is a system. We know that.
Well, one thing that I'll say to add to your statements that and even gives it even more of a bite or whatever you would want to say. The elite seem to hint at the fact that this is what they're doing. What do I mean? I believe it's the Economist magazine. I believe that's owned by one of the Rothschilds.
Yeah, it is.
But on the page that deals with European Union unity, rather, it's called the Charlemagne page. And Charlemagne, I believe, it was the first head of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, why that's significant? Because it goes to what you're saying. The Holy Roman Empire was a merger of political and religious. That's something, to be honest, that's a belief I've had that's never really changed. I believe that's what they're building, some form of it. I believe they're rebuilding like the Holy Roman Empire. That's what I believe. I don't talk about it that much, but I believe that's pretty much the aim of what they're doing. And the reason why I say in some form is because when we look at Daniel, the book of Daniel, and it talks about the legs, the iron going all the way down to the end of time. The iron is still present in the end time. It just seems to be some sort of modification because you have iron mixed with miry clay. And so you can't deny, that Roman presence is, according to the Bible, that Roman presence is still here. And that's true. You know what I'm saying?
And it was the fourth beast of Daniel's vision.
So
why don't you, we better close here. Why don't you tell
that's
people,
all I was going to say.
You got a magazine and everything. Why don't you tell
Say
people,
what now?
You got a magazine and everything. Why don't you tell people about yourself?
Oh, okay. Okay. I think we both are kind of going in and out.
Oh, okay.
You still there?
Yeah.
Still there?
I can hear you still if you want to just tell about your magazine.
Okay. Me and my wife have a magazine. It's called Back to Eden News Mag. This is our main magazine. We have other magazines, but our main one is Back to Eden News Mag. In there, we deal with the main focus is God's original intent, and I mean just his intent in general. Period. And of course, we deal with different topics on there. I have a section in there where I usually write an article. And so, of course, in my section, you're going to hear me talk about things for the most part that I talked about tonight. And so, if you're at all interested in that, I am on Facebook, and my wife, Clarissa Denise Rhinehart. That's Clarissa Denise Rhinehart. She's on Facebook. You can either inbox us. It is $25 for a year digital. It's a digital magazine. It's a digital magazine. It's a $25 for a year subscription and $4 for a single digital issue. If you are feeling to do it, please support, Christian media. And I say that in general. I mean, it's something that's definitely needed. Now, when I say Christian media, I'm talking about Christians that are sober. And I thank God for all the Christians. But I'm saying when it comes to media, try to support those that are sober and understand the times and that are going to keep you alerted to certain things that you may not hear in the mainstream media. So with that being said, continue to support Jim Duke. Jim didn't ask me to say this, but I'm just going to suggest it. Jim Duke, he's someone that's really, digging and trying to really bring things to the people as well. As God lays it on your heart, contribute financially. I know Jim's not doing this for money. He may not like me saying it. I don't know. But I'm just saying, I know it costs something to do things like this, And so, if you've been blessed and if you're being blessed, I would encourage you to sow financially. And if you can't do that, Jim's not going to condemn you, I'm sure. And I wouldn't either. But if you can't do that, keep him in your prayers. Pray for him. As the old saints used to say, pray for him, not on him. Pray for him. But pray for him.
Yeah, we definitely need a covering.
Keep me and my wife.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amen.
And Julius is one to he seeks out the truth, and he makes sure he gets it. He tries to get it right. He tries to get it factually correct, and you can trust his work as well. Julius Rhinehart, thanks for joining me with this and sharing your insight on all this.
Well, bless you. To God be the glory. It's good being on here one more time, Jim.
All right. And for everybody else, my website is jimdukeperspective.com, and that's where you can check out my information. We'll see you next time. God bless.